So let me begin. I'm not the biggest fan of Drinker. I've been fairly critical of him in other venues. But on Dune, we converge. He loved the movie. He has a few criticisms, and this video has gotten a lot of. It's not surprising, he has a really large subscriber count. And so it'll feel like I'm necessarily being harsh to raise my profile or bring extraneous material into it because he hates The Last Jedi. I like The Last Jedi. He hated the sequel trilogy. I think it was much better than he thinks it is, etc., etc. No, I'm not doing that. I'm honestly reviewing what he reviewed in Dune, and honestly, the video was fairly weak, but it did have a few good points. We'll listen to him on his criticisms and then try to finesse or refine his positions. He's not stupid. I do think Drinker sometimes makes very acute perceptive points, but frankly, a lot of times he does these weird polemics. And with Dune, I'll give him credit. He did kind of control himself, but I still think he made a lot of unnecessary arguments. So let's hear him speak, and then we'll try to move on from there.
He probably wouldn't have been my first choice as Paul. He's a bit too young and too feminine looking, but he does grow on you over the course of the movie, and there's moments when he reveals a darker side to his character that play out really well. He's a man who doesn't truly understand who and what he is, railing and rebelling against a destiny that circumstances are slowly pushing him towards. Also, I love the fact that Rebecca Ferguson is playing his mother when she's only like 13 years older than him. On the other side, there's not many people who consider Jason Momoa to be a versatile actor, and this movie's not likely to change anyone's minds. I also had reservations about Zendaya after her, performance in the Spider-Man movies, and to be honest, my fears were kind of justified here. She does the same weird squinting thing that someone must have told her conveys immense personal gravitas, but the good news is that she's barely in the movie. She shows up in dreams and visions occasionally, but she only appears in the flesh for like the final 10 minutes of the film, and I'm fine with that. Talking about the ending though, does bring me on to one of my big criticisms of Dune, in that it doesn't really have one. It just kind of stops in the middle of a scene with no resolution to anything and no sense of narrative completeness. I know they made the decision to split Dune into two films, but honestly I think they could have found a more natural endpoint than this. Basically, this entire movie serves as a prologue to the real meat of Dune's narrative, which is Paul's rise through the ranks of the Fremen, the struggle against his destiny to become a messiah, and the eventual battle to retake Arrakis.
Seems like he's familiar with the Lynch version and the sci-fi version, and may have even read the book. I mean, he's a novelist, but it seems beyond this basic plot. I don't think he understood what Dune is or what the deeper mythology is. So let's just deal with Paul. Well, there are problems with Paul, but him being feminine looking is not one of them. So the fact that, right, he looks like a weakling, no, that's supposed to be. As for Timothée Chalamet being too young, he's actually much older than he should be. He's already an adult. In the books, he starts off as a very tiny teenager. The one real criticism here is that actually Timothée is too tall to be Paul. He's way too tall. But they still chose him anyway. He clearly knows the book at most at a basic level, or not at all. And he seems to be judging Timothée by these, I guess, more Hollywood standards. You should have somebody who's young but tough, a little bit more muscular. But that's not what Dune is about. Dune is not about an action film. And I think this is that his perception of what Dune is a little skewed. However, he did make some good points. And I agree with him that Zendaya was a weak. I don't agree with how he framed her. I think he was being unnecessarily, frankly, mean-spirited. It's fine. I'm not in love with Zendaya. I'm not obsessed with her, but I think she did fine. But yes, I agree that thus far she doesn't feel like this version of Shani or Chani is relatively weak. I do think the Lynch version is much stronger. The sci-fi version is stronger. It still feels like she's just doing cosplay. But when she is in the visions and Paul sees her, she's effective. But when she actually speaks, she doesn't feel like a Fremen. So hopefully that'll be redeemed part 2, but it felt a little weird and out of place. I also don't agree with him on Jason Momoa. I think actually he was one of the strongest parts. I think his acting was actually quite a revelation. I wasn't really shocked. I think he did a great Drogo on Game of Thrones, but this really stood out. They did a really good job with the script and with him. Then he makes a lot of major and minor mistakes in mythology. Like one of his big things he goes to is that, well, everything seems predetermined. No, that is radically wrong. Jessica having Paul was not predetermined. Bene Gesserit were trying to predetermine it, but she made a fateful decision to not have a daughter. That is very critical. Paul existing in the first place shows she made a choice, and she made a choice that was not pre-programmed. He doesn't really understand Dune. Not saying this polemically, just honestly, he doesn't seem to understand what he's saying. He really didn't get it, which is fine. Again, he's much more of a passive fan. Interestingly, his subscribers seem to know the material a lot better and corrected him a lot in the comments. But there we are. I think he basically doesn't understand Dune, which is fine. It's okay. The review's still okay, and it's good that, again, nearly 1 million people have seen this review, so they'll at least get a better idea of what Dune is. But his descriptions are very, very misleading. And as far as predestiny, I think he's missing the point. Because this is also a criticism, which I pointed out for different reasons, about the ending being weak. It is a weak ending, but not because it, quote, failed to be a complete story. It was a complete story. He squished different parts of the book. And they did this quite explicitly. And I think this part was well done, where Paul has to decide, will you become this Messiah, prophetic being? And he says yes. A lot of it was very quick, but the world building here, I think, was strong, that the visions cumulatively are showing him, okay, you have to make a choice here. And he says explicitly to us, the audience, okay, I understand. I'm going to stay on Arrakis. I'm going to become this person. So there is, quote, thematic ending, but it could have been stronger. So I agree with him, it's a weak ending, but not because the story was not completed. It's not a prologue. Because if you had just gotten this movie, that's the story. The story is of this very confused, powerful being who has to push through these doubts and clearly traumatized, has to make a choice. And he does make a choice. Makes a choice. I'm going to become what the Bene Gesserit want, but for my reasons. And again, if you know the larger mythology, it's to basically fool them and take over. But in terms of this story, he has to make just a personal choice after losing his family, or most of it, how to move on. I agree with him. It's a weak ending, but not for the reasons he states. This is a very mediocre review, but I think it's worth engaging with Drinker. And honestly, given his much larger subscribers, I think he actually would be friendly to the idea of an extended cut. I doubt we're going to speak to one another or be friendly ever, but I think working through it in intermediaries, we can sort of agree on major points that he obviously supported part two. He obviously wants to see more of the story, as do I. So at least on some points, both passive and more active fans should unite. But is this a good review? No, but it's okay. Don't take everything he says seriously. It's mostly sort of very misleading, but still, it's a sincere attempt to understand Dune. But I still think he gets way too much stuff wrong. But at least he tried, and I do think he should be given a lot of points for that. Definitely check it out, but don't dislike it. I think but it doesn't earn a like either. It's sort of just it's a sincere try. It needs a lot of work. Thanks for listening.